whenever I come to places that are actually not in Brazil, one thing that I always get is this question that people ask me that, do you realize that you don't look like you're Brazilian? Well, the fact is that I do. But I am Brazilian. I'm very Brazilian, actually. I do have a passport just like that one. I was born in Brazil. My parents were born in Brazil. The closest I get to any foreigner in my family is that my mother's parents were born in Japan. But that's not really how I define myself. And that's just something that's not uncommon in Brazil. Because Brazil is a place that has people from many different places who went there. Like me, there are 1.5 million people who consider themselves, well, actually they don't consider themselves, but they have Japanese families. 3 million German. Some people say 7 million Lebanese, 31 million Italian. And that's, of course, that we are a big country, so 200 million, of course, you can have lots of those numbers. But if you ask those people, what do they consider themselves? The answer will, of course, be they are Brazilians. And of course they are, and of course I am. So I think that you may see that the story that I'm telling is really my story. This is the story of Brazil, a story about my country. And the story begins with this man. This man is called Fernando Collor de Mello. He was elected president in 1989. And he had a very tough job when he took it. The job was to solve one problem that was something that was really, really breaking us up. It was hyperinflation. I know that Moldova had an episode of hyperinflation in '92, I think. That was just when Soviet Union ended. It was something that I think you know how that is. You have prices that go up every day. You kind of lose track of how much things cost. You have difficulty to make plans. It's really, really disruptive. It really changes your life. But one thing that you have to say is that the experience that we had in Brazil is not an episode of hyperinflation. This is what we had of inflation in the 80s, the beginning of the 80s. We had an inflation in this chart that was 5% maybe until 82 and then 10%. And that's monthly inflation. Economists consider 30% per year to be hyperinflation, and yet we had 10% a month. And so that was something that really, really kind of was part of our lives, part of things that we managed, but they're really, really hard. But then, they're so hard that then we had this plan. It's called the Cruzado Plan. That was in 1986. It was a plan in which we changed our currency. Our currency was called Cruzeiro. We changed to another one called Cruzado, there was an exchange rate of 1,000 to 1 because prices in Cruzeiros were too high because of inflation. And then, well, we had this period of time in which we actually kind of felt that problems were solved. That we kind of have that feeling of, of success. But the problem with that, the problem that happened with the Cruzado Plan is that it managed to do that by just mandating that prices could not increase at all. No price in the economy could increase. And the problem is that that's really not feasible, that can't work for a long time. But it was very popular because we kind of hadn't realized how much inflation was a problem to us. But then it had to end. The moment that the price freeze was stopped, and that was just after the November '86 election, prices just shut up because all the problems that were there continued. And the problem there is that inflation kept up. You see that graph of inflation, that's to the 90s, 89, and you see those dips in inflation rates were just attempts that we had to solve that same problem. Each one of those plans, in April '87, the Bresser plan, it had a price freeze just like the other one. The Summer plan that had a price freeze and a new currency, Cruzado Novo then, this time. They took us to a place in March 1990 in which we actually had this increasing inflation turned into an 82 inflation in a month. That moment, you have to realize that it's just something that you have to do something about that. You know that. People get, inflation changes the way you perceive the world. Inflation changes our relationship to everything. And how come we couldn't get a hold of it? Every single country that we knew had solved their inflation problems, if they had it at all. Sometimes we looked at that and we kind of have that feeling that we were not worth of anything. We were a joke. We have had 10 years of inflation, of high inflation, 4 economic plans, 4 attempts to change that thing. And those plans had, price freezes. We have changed our currency twice, from Cruzeiro to Cruzado to New Cruzado. 1 million to 1 was the exchange rate from Cruzeiro to the New Cruzado. And of course, that was enough. We felt that was enough. And we were kind of desperate. And when you're desperate was the moment in which we elected Fernando Collor de Mello. Collor, actually, he had a very strong mandate. He had all country voting for him. Of course, just not all the country, but he had a great majority because he promised to do some really, really tough choices and get rid of that problem and bring us to modernity, to turn us into a normal country. And that's what he did. He did a price and wage freeze. He created a new currency, just like every other plan before his. But he also did he opened the economy, he did some privatization, he did some changes, his plan did some changes. But the thing that everyone remembers from that plan was some ideas. I wouldn't say interesting, but the idea that part of the problem that we had with inflation was that people had too much money. And the way to deal with that is that bank accounts were frozen. Everything about 50,000 Cruzados Novos, New Cruzados, they were just not accessible to anyone. So if you want to buy something, you just had those 50,000 of all the money that you saved, all your savings, everything. That was supposed to last for maybe 18 months. Just enough to get rid of inflation, then everything would be good again. But 50,000 actually is not that much. 50,000 is maybe 1,000 or 2,000 euros, and that applies to companies too. Companies that had to pay salaries, that had to pay their suppliers. So this caused a major disruption. But of course, we went for that. We went for that very, very painful thing, just because we believe that that's something that we have to do. We have to get rid of this. We are desperate. But it didn't work. January 91, you might remember I said the other one was March 90. This one is January 91. That's less than a year later. A new plan had to be put. That was called Collor II. It had price freezes. It didn't work. In 1991, you had the Marcílio plan. Oh, you saw 91, same year, January, May. It's just doing things faster and faster because things are getting much worse. Now, what you have to think and what we thought at the time was, what kind of place is this? What kind of country allows the situation to get so hard that can't get its act together? We had this problem for 10 years. We tried radical things to fix that, but we couldn't. We are not competent enough to do that kind of thing. We were a failure as a country. We were a failure as people. We couldn't even win the World Cup. 82, 86, and 90. We lost those 3 times. And we had some good teams, but still we couldn't get our act together for the one thing that we are good at. Football. Football is our thing. Thank you. But this guy, maybe this was the guy who kind of saved us. And you can look by his picture that he's a very corrupt guy. He was Collor's money man. He was the guy who took money, took donations for his campaigns, and the guy who paid his bill and asked for bribes, and of course the guy who corrupted government to make government do things for his special friends who paid for those favors. But the thing was that that guy was caught. Actually, Collor was caught. There are some a scandal. It was just some soap opera thing. His brother just denounced him, and lots of stories. But the fact was that when people saw that and saw that those things that we consider to be facts of life, like corruption or incompetence, they are actually not really something that we could endure. This is what happened next. This is the demonstration. This happened in São Paulo. That's what 500,000 people looked like. And those 500 people were 500 people just in São Paulo. You had those all over Brazil, and Brazil is a big country, so you had millions on the streets to do that. And of course, you have that feeling that you have sometimes, that you cannot do things, or that you can do, you can just do things through demonstrations like that, to do a small change. But what happened at that point was that there was, at that moment, something that was going on for some time became clear. And that thing was that we were not going to allow corruption and incompetence to be facts of life. We were not going to stand and just look at it happening and doing nothing. That's something that it was really, really not something that we learned at the moment. But it was something that, that kind of made sense. We could see that it made sense. So in '93, we had a new plan because we had removed the corrupt Collor from power, but still had inflation. So we had a new currency in '93. Of course, currency is another thing that we were good at that time. But this one didn't have a price freeze. It was just so that numbers won't be too high, prices won't be too high. And then this is the deal. This is what really solved the problem. It is the 1994 July plan. It was a plan of hell. What it did was something that's really, really amazing that I'm not going to tell you, but it's something that you look at it, first you think, is it possible to do something like that? And then what you think is, how come I never thought of something like that? But they did it, it worked, it was very competently done. And I don't know if it's because of this, but what happened next was that we won the World Cup. This is kind of a special moment for us because the two major problems that we had, the problem of inflation, three problems, the problem of corruption in government, and the World Cup. We kind of fixed those three at the same time. But of course, we didn't. The World Cup, yes, but the other two, inflation was okay, but corruption, not yet. Because what changed actually at that moment was not that suddenly everything got good. Suddenly, we didn't end corruption in any way. Well, in some ways. But what happened was that there was something that changed in the way people saw government and the way they saw themselves. Because for you to go on the streets to fight against corruption and to remove a president, and you have to see that this is a presidential country, so a president is not supposed to be removed from office unless his term expires. And so to do that required a lot of strength, a lot of effort, and requires believing that we would be able to do that together. And believing that there were other people that were just wanting to do that. Those things have changed. Those things have suddenly, they have just become clear. We still had two economic crises after that. 99, 2002, those are really bad, but those were not inflation-related crises. Those are something completely different. And we learned from them. In 2007, when there was the huge economic global crisis, we barely felt it. It's 1 year of of downturn and then another one of huge growth for us because we had learned our lesson. We had, after that, after the way people just started to believe in, some things kind of looked like they were possible. We had a reform on the state management. We had this fiscal responsibility law, which meant that governments had to be more responsible with money. They couldn't just go into debt. They couldn't just spend too much. They had to give account of where the money went. But this is actually my favorite one. This is the Information Access Law from 2011, and the reason I like this one is because it shows a little what I was telling you about how sometimes people get together and do things. This law is in large part due to a small group of friends who kind of wanted this to happen. They formed a group, and that group kind of lobbied, tried to get people to realize how important it is to have openness, to have government information available for the people. And so what they did was they went to Congress and they talked to Congress people and talked to them about how important that was, how that could work. And well, they kind of felt like it meant nothing, but one day they got a call from one of the Congress people that they were talking to, and that congressman told them, you know what, I have this law on my desk, and it's something about something you're talking about. What do you think? He sent them the law. They looked at it and found some flaws. They found some ways in which the law would not have teeth, would not work, would not be good enough. And they just got together and they're computer programmers, journalists, but what they did was they kind of hacked the law. They tried to see how to make things work. They look at other things. And then they sent back that law to that congressman and told him, well, this is how we think it would be better. This is why, these are the reasons. And that was the law that was actually promulgated later. Just this group of 20-something people who did something that was actually hopeless in a way. But what I see here is one thing that I think is the most important. What happens when you have a way to think, that you change your way to think, that you actually believe that things are going to change, that actually you kind of question that the way things are supposed to be that way. Well, actually, you see, you have this system in which things happen, you have no control over them, you feel like you can't do anything, you're too weak. But there are other people who are there, and other people who are working, are thinking the same thing. But you just have to get together. You have to get together, you have to work in a way that will change things together. And that's one of the good things. Actually, I get really excited when I got here. I just saw lots of people with that spirit. People who want to change. People who are not just want to change. They want to make an effort to bring about that change. And that's the thing that I think is the most important that we learned from that disgraceful episode with Collor, is that actually, while we thought 30 years ago that we are worthless, that we meant nothing, and that corruption is actually the way things are, and it's not going to change, inflation is a fact of life, we have to live like that, we are nothing. But the moment that we realized that that was actually not true, that we could do something, I think that's when things changed. Thank you.